Hello friends, welcome back to Faith and Arrow Homestead. My name is Jaylee, and for the very first time in this townhouse, we are in the kitchen today. So as you can see, I am pregnant. I'm 31 weeks and some change, and I am starting to think about postpartum meal prep. And this is very important to me because I went through my first trimester and I was very tired and nauseous, and the desire to cook from scratch really departed from me. And that was really difficult. I went from cooking everything from scratch to really going through this journey where I had to rediscover it. And I could see that happening again once I have a newborn. This is all very new for me, as it is for all first-time moms, and I just want to set myself up for success the absolute best I can, because I ate a lot of Taco Bell in my first trimester, and I really don't want to do that with a newborn. I really want to be able to still provide nourishing meals without that pressure, because I want to just enjoy my newborn and really be present and live in the moment with her without feeling like I'm failing in some other place. So I want to take postpartum food prep very seriously. So I am starting probably even a little bit early because I know I do have some time left, but I just want to get some things in the freezer. It's going to make me feel so much better. So with this being my very first video in this new kitchen in the townhouse, I'm gonna go really easy on myself. I'm actually really nervous about it. It's 9:30 and I'm just now turning the camera on because I've been like trying to hype myself up for it all morning. I think I'm nervous because this is the kind of content that I really enjoy making. We've been doing this together for years now, and so much has changed. And I want to do a good job, you know? And so there's that pressure there that I'm putting on myself, but nonetheless. So I'm going to take it easy, and we're going to do a bread freezer prep, and we're going to make some loaves of bread to put in the freezer. We're going to make buttermilk biscuits, and we're going to make puff pastry. The reason I chose these, obviously having loaves of bread, great. I love buttermilk biscuits. I do a lot of biscuits and gravy, biscuits with honey, biscuits as a side for dinner. Great thing to have in the freezer. But the puff pastry I know is a bit different, probably not what you're expecting in a postpartum prep video, but I love having homemade puff pastry on hand. I love it. One of my absolute favorite things to make from scratch are like little, I don't know exactly what you call them, maybe hand pies, perhaps, but probably not like the ones that I normally see. I love to do sausage and cream cheese stuffed. I'm just gonna call them hand pies. I also like to do kind of like homemade Hot Pockets with like cheese and pepperoni or cheese and ham. I love doing the breakfast pastries that have like egg and cheese and maybe sausage or bacon in them. And you can also do sweet versions of all of these as well. You could make homemade Pop-Tarts if you have puff pastry on hand. There's so many things you can do with puff pastry, and I always really thoroughly enjoy having it and cooking with it. And so I want to get some of that in the freezer as well. So that's what we're gonna start with, this first postpartum prep video. I'm really excited to have these things in my freezer, and I'm excited, guys, that we're back together in the kitchen. Unfortunately, I'm actually not ready to get started. I have to go to the store and get butter because all of these things require butter, and I have none. So even with it being 9:30, I still actually have to go to the store. So I'm gonna go ahead to Aldi and just pick up a couple packs of butter, and then we are gonna hit the ground running when I get back. Butter acquired, and I had exact change for it too. Okay, we've got the butter. It is so hot out there. It has been in the 90s for the past couple of weeks, and I like the heat, and I've always said that, and I will probably say that for the rest of my life, but it's tough when you're pregnant. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. We're going to start with the puff pastry, sort of. We're just going to get the butter going for it because it has to be super, super cold. But we're actually going to start with the bread. I want to make 2 loaves of bread. Now, the loaves of bread and the buttermilk biscuits are going to be freshly milled. The puff pastry is going to use just regular all-purpose flour. Freshly milled flour is denser, and so I have never tried, so to be fair, it could work. I've just never tried to make the puff pastry using freshly milled flour. I don't know how puffy it would end up being, and I just really want that to be how I've had it in the past. So I'm not going to mess with it. I'm just going to use all purpose. But for the bread and the biscuits, we are going to freshly milled flour, and I'll tell you all about that as we get into it. So we are going to actually be making 2 batches of the puff pastry, but I don't combine them. I don't just double the recipe and do everything together. I make the one recipe twice, and that's what I'm going to do here. So for this recipe, you need 1.5 sticks of butter, and you want to cut it into cubes and then put those cubes in the freezer. You want your butter to be super, super cold when you're making puff pastry, especially with how warm it is outside. Even with us having the air conditioner on, naturally it's just going to be warm in the house as well. So we want to especially make sure that our butter is spending some time in the freezer to get nice and cold. All right, now, because I said we are going to double that, we're doing 2 recipes of this, but we're not just doing it all together. I'm gonna take this butter wrapper and kind of set it on top of this first batch of butter here before I cut up my second to keep it separate, because I do want to keep all the ingredients separate. If we were to combine those, then I'd have to wonder, well, does one recipe have more butter than the other? So we're just gonna separate them using the butter wrapper, and that should keep it nice and organized. Now we are actually gonna go ahead and do the exact same thing just while we're here and we're cutting up butter. We're gonna do the exact same thing for the buttermilk biscuits because they also like for the butter to be cold. And so while I'm doing it, I might as well just go ahead and do it for that too. I am doing a double recipe for the biscuits, and I am just gonna do it all together in the same bowl. I care a little less about keeping those separate. So this recipe calls for 1 stick of butter per recipe. So I'm gonna go ahead and get 2 sticks of butter cut and cubed and also in the freezer. Okay, I went downstairs and I refilled my hard white wheat and my soft white wheat berries, because we're gonna use the hard white for the loaves of bread and the soft white for the buttermilk biscuits. Okay, let's talk about this bread recipe. So I'm going to use the fresh milled flour everyday sandwich bread recipe from Grains in Small Places. Grains in Small Places and Freshly Milled Mama are my 2 go-to sources for freshly milled recipes. Their recipes work for me. I really like them. Grains in Small Places does have a sourdough version of this recipe. I'm gonna be really honest with you, I have been completely uninspired with sourdough lately. I still have my starter over here, and I use it to make a freshly milled sourdough flatbread for breakfast every morning. So I'm at least still getting it in my diet a little bit, but I'm not really baking with it, and I'm just not really inspired to. And I'm not gonna hold that against myself. And I've said this before on this channel, if I had to choose between sourdough and freshly milled flour, I would choose freshly milled flour. There's more nutrition in that than there is all-purpose flour and sourdough. Of course, doing freshly milled sourdough is the best, but it's just not what I'm in the mood to do, so I'm not going to. I'm gonna do freshly milled yeasted bread. I will have this recipe posted down in the description. She has it 3 different sizes because she knows that people have different sized bread pans. So she basically has a small, a medium, and a large recipe. So we're gonna do the large to do 2 regular sized bread pans of bread. I think that that'll be great. So this says to mill 970 grams of I'm gonna use hard white wheat. She does also have the cup measurements in her recipes. That's awesome, because if you're, it really appeals to everybody when you do it that way, when you've got both the cups and the grams. And I follow plenty of other creators who will use the cups. I am not that way. I do everything in grams. It gives me the most consistent turnout when I'm baking, and especially in a recipe like this where I'm using such a large quantity of ingredients, I do not want to mess that up. So I follow the grams. I have a kitchen scale. I will link it down in the description because it was like, I don't know, I think at the time I paid like $8. I think it might be like 12 now on Amazon, but it's a great little scale. It has never done me wrong. And and we're gonna go ahead and measure out. So the weight in berries is the same as the weight in flour. So when you are getting ready to mill, I was actually just watching a creator this morning when I was eating my breakfast who just like threw caution to the wind and just poured berries into the top of her mill. And I was like, how do you know how much you're getting? And the answer is you don't. So I like to put in exactly the amount of flour I need out in berries, and that way I'm not wasting, there's not flour sitting. As soon as it's ground, it starts to oxidize and lose nutrition. I want exactly the amount that I need. So I'm going to get a little bowl, and as I said, we're doing hard white, and I need 970 grams. Which is going to be quite a lot. We'll stop at 800 just so I don't overflow my bowl, and we'll get this milling and then come back and measure out another 170. All right, so we have our flour milled quite a bit, almost 8 cups. I do still go ahead and measure the rest of the ingredients, or weigh them rather. Like I said, she gives both the weighted measurement as well as the cup, tablespoon, whatever. And so her recipe calls for 6 tablespoons of butter. 6 tablespoons of butter, according to her recipe, weigh 84 grams. So we're gonna do both. I've got my KitchenAid mixer bowl here on my scale, and let's see, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is how much it should be. Let's see what it actually ends up as. And I am going to cut it into cubes, and you'll see why in just a moment. And that, just guessing, just cutting roughly, brought me to 83 grams. So I'm just gonna put another little sliver in here and call it a day, but that worked out really well, so her measurement was correct. Here's the thing about her recipes. She uses instant yeast, and I understand why she uses instant yeast. When you are working with a yeasted, freshly milled recipe, you have to be really careful about how you time things, because freshly milled flour needs a hydration period. That's where the flour and the water are together. So that, or the flour and the liquid in your recipe have been combined, and you allow it to sit so that the freshly milled flour can absorb that liquid. The reason that's needed, but that you don't hear about that with all-purpose recipes, is because freshly milled flour contains the bran and the germ. The bran and the germ are parts of the wheat berry that are sifted away in the conventional processing of flour, and those are tougher. They're the shell of the wheat berry, and so they need time to sit in that liquid and absorb that liquid and soften. Otherwise, you could end up with a really dense, hard bread product, which nobody wants. And so it's really important that you allow your dough to hydrate. But if you've already added your yeast into the recipe, it's going to start rising, and you're not going to have as much time for that dough to sit and hydrate. So she uses instant yeast, which is something that you can just throw into the recipe later. There's no activation period. I don't use instant yeast in my kitchen ever. I don't even have any here in this house. I'm an active dry yeast kind of girl. I don't know why, it's just what I've always done. I buy the 1 pound bag from Azure Standard. I keep it in my freezer, and it has served me well. Active dry yeast needs to be activated, and you do that by putting it in lukewarm water with sugar or honey or some kind of sweetener to help it wake up. It gets foamy, that means it's active, and you add it into your recipe. So in us doing this recipe that calls for instant yeast, all that means is that when we are adding our liquid and our sweetener into the bowl, we're just gonna leave a little bit out, put it in a smaller separate bowl when the time comes so that we can use it to activate our yeast, and then we'll just pour that in. It ends up being the same amount of ingredients in the end. It just means that you have to have a little forethought in the recipe. before you jump all in. So with that being said, right now in our mixing bowl, we're putting our butter, our water, and our milk. So in her recipe, it says to put the water, butter, and milk together in a microwave safe bowl, microwave it to get it warm, and then put it in. I don't do it that way. I put the butter in first, and then over here, I have my kettle of water that I've had going. It's actually quite hot, almost boiling. And I'm going to pour the hot water over the butter. It's going to melt / soften the butter. And when it cools a little so it's not quite so hot, I'll add my milk. I don't usually, I know what I just said about the butter, how I measured it and I weighed it. I'm not gonna do that with the water. I don't put it in like a separate measuring cup or anything. It says 360 grams, which is half a cup of water, instead of pouring it into a measuring cup and then pouring it in here. I'm just gonna do 360 grams of water. I have still been drinking raw milk. I've been drinking raw milk this entire pregnancy, and it has been fantastic. I cannot tell you guys how much I just like crave it. I have wanted milk almost, except for maybe a few weeks in the beginning when I was sick. I wanted milk. I've wanted it this whole time. So I've been getting it locally, a gallon at a time, which I really like. I like the fact that I can go and just get a couple of jars, and that way there's no real pressure for me to work through it fast. I can just kind of like bake with it and drink with it at my leisure, and I've been really enjoying that. So we're going to use our raw whole milk in this recipe, and that whole milk is just really going to give this bread great texture, and I'm so excited about that. So I can probably go ahead and pour that in here. It's the same amount of weight. It's half a cup or 360 grams, just like the water. Oh, you know what I just realized? What am I doing? What did I just get done telling you? I'm not leaving out any liquid. That's okay. So I'm just going to do 300 grams of milk, and I'll leave out 60 grams. Pregnancy brain. That's funny. 300 grams of milk, and I will do 60 grams in a smaller container, but that just means now I'm going to have to, because I didn't do the warm water, which is what I meant to do. I meant to set aside some warm water. I'll have to warm up this milk, but that's okay. Just made one extra step for myself, but that's what it means to have pregnancy brain. Okay, the next thing that it says to do is add our sugar, salt, and egg to our stand mixer, but because I already have this right here, I'm just gonna go ahead and add the sugar in here. You could also use honey. Because it's such a small amount, sugar's easier for me to work with than honey, so I don't usually use the honey. I know that flies in the face of all the principles, but it's fine. I know I keep going back and forth here with how I'm measuring. It says 6 tablespoons of sugar or 126 grams. I care a little less about that. You know, when you're baking, you just need to understand what the purpose of each ingredient is to decide how carefully you want to use that ingredient. So with the sugar, if there was a little more or a little less, it ultimately would not affect the outcome of this bread, and so I'm not going to go by the weight because I don't really care. It says 6 tablespoons, that's fine. So I'm going to add just one of those 6 tablespoons into my bowl with the milk, and we'll deal with that in a second. And then here, which I didn't even need to put it on the scale, but that's okay. We're gonna do 5. We are going to do 3 teaspoons of salt. If you're new here, I use Redmond real salt. I buy a 25-pound bag of it every year from Azure Standard, and it is by far my favorite salt. I love it so much. And got my cute little salt chicken, which somebody recently commented and showed their appreciation for my salt chicken, and it made me really happy that somebody else liked it as much as I like it. And then lastly, for this large recipe of the bread that we're doing, it calls for 2 eggs. I've got a couple of farm fresh eggs here. With this many ingredients, I certainly do not want to take the chance that one of these eggs could be bad. I am the kind of person that doesn't usually care, but with this amount, I do. It would be so tragic if it got wasted, and I would be very upset. So 1 egg and 2 eggs. I am very fortunate in this kitchen here in this townhouse to have a permanent home for my KitchenAid mixer, and you better believe we're keeping her in her home. We are not lugging her around anywhere. So let's take this over to her and get these ingredients combined. Notice we do have the dough hook on here. That's what I like to use when I'm making bread. The next step is to add our flour into this wet mixture here. Now, here's the thing. This is almost 1,000 grams of flour, 8 cups roughly, and this is gonna be a lot for my stand mixer. So what it says to do, it says to add the flour and let it combine until there is no dry flour left, which will be easy to do with a freshly milled recipe because again, the brain and the germ needs time to absorb that water. So at first, this is gonna be really wet. So it'll be easy for it to combine enough to get rid of all the spots of dry flour. And then that's when you let it sit to absorb and hydrate. And so we're gonna go ahead and do that. But then after that, we knead it until window pane. My KitchenAid mixer is gonna really struggle with this amount of flour, and I don't wanna put that kind of pressure on the motor. So let's go ahead and do these first couple steps. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, and then we'll talk about what my plan is to deal with that issue. Now I can show you what I'm talking about. So look at how wet that is. That is a very wet and sticky dough. There is no more sign of flour. It's all incorporated, and so now this needs to hydrate, and this will be much less wet and sticky after it has been allowed time to hydrate. So the recipe says that you can do anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours. We're gonna move on to our next recipe. I'm not gonna worry about that. We're gonna move on, and then when we're ready to come back to this, we'll come back to this. Now we're going to move on to the puff pastry. And this is only a few simple ingredients. It's actually really simple and easy to make. It's just that you have to do it right, or else the product you end up with may not be quite what you were hoping for. I am going to use my scale for this. One of the reasons that I'm constantly trying to sell you guys on using a scale is because it's just so much easier, especially when it comes to flour, because this calls for 1 1/3 cup flour, and the proper way to measure flour is the spoon and level method, where you take your flour, you spoon it into your measuring cups, and then you use a knife to flatten it out, and that gives you the closest guess that you can have, the closest chance to having the actual correct amount of flour. But this recipe does have both the cups and the grams. Yes, which means I can just measure how much flour, like weigh it, and then I don't have to do all that mess. That's crazy. So this is saying it wants 166 grams of flour. So instead of dealing with this nonsense, I'm just going to scoop in 166 grams of flour. And it's so much easier than trying to use measuring cups. So this just wants you to add all of your dry ingredients right into your bowl. So it also wants 1 teaspoon of sugar. No weight on that. I'm just going to put in a teaspoon of sugar. And it wants 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Just going to use my spoon here to give that a quick stir. Now, this recipe, you really need to use your hands. Do you have to use your hands? No, you could use a spatula or a spoon, but it's recommended to use your hands. I always use my hands. So I am gonna take my rings off because this can get a little messy. And I'm gonna go ahead and get the rest of my ingredients prepared so that I'm not having to keep rinsing my hands and touching things. So I'm gonna get the butter out of the freezer, and the other thing that you need is 6 to 8 tablespoons of ice cold water. So I always just get a bowl, throw some water and a couple ice cubes in it, and call it good. All right, first things first, let's go ahead and get our butter in here so that we can put the rest of the butter that we need for the second recipe right back in the freezer, because we don't want this out of the freezer. We want it to stay nice and cold. We don't need the scale anymore either. So first step here is to just get the butter coated in the flour. You don't want to really over touch this. You can kind of start. I mean, the butter's so hard that it's going to be difficult to even do anything with it. So you can kind of start pinching it in, but it's frozen solid. So, okay, that's fine. Get as much of that flour off my hands as I can. And then the next step here is going to be adding in our water. So we've got ice cold water here, and I'm going to go ahead and right off the bat add 2 tablespoons in here, just to get it going. And then you're going to use your hands to start combining that. And you're looking for this to eventually come together into a shaggy dough. And that should take anywhere from 6 to 8 tablespoons of that cold water. As your hands are in here, your butter is going to start breaking up. What you do not want to have happen is this turn into like just a paste. You really want the butter to stay defined. And so that's why everything needs to be so dang cold. So we added in 2 tablespoons. I'm gonna go ahead and add in 2 more tablespoons. That brings us up to a total of 4. And come back and keep working it. Okay, so we've had 4 tablespoons of water. We're gonna add 2 more. That'll bring us up to 6. And that might be all we need to add. The way that we would know if we need to add more is can we take this and clump it into a shaggy ball that holds its shape or not? And if the answer is no, then I would just add 1 tablespoon at a time from here. But if we can get it to hold its shape, then we're good and we don't need any more. So let's see. No, not really, right? Doesn't really look like it's wanting to hold its shape. So let's add 1 more. So this is holding its shape, but there is still some loose flour in here. So what I'm gonna do instead of putting a I don't think this needs a tablespoon. I'm just gonna dip my fingers in the water and see if I can't incorporate the rest of this into this ball. Yeah, that worked. So now we've got this shaggy ball of pastry dough, huge chunks of butter. That's okay. This looks great. All right, so the next step, I'm going to take my flour and just put some down on the surface here, just to keep it from sticking to this dang butcher block. Put my dough, and I'm just gonna start pushing it into kind of a rectangle. It's gonna be really a rough rectangle, especially because my chunks of butter are so big. I just kind of use the palm of my hand, especially because I am still trying to keep this butter from getting too warm. So I don't want to get too handsy with it, but we do need to get it pushed out into just a rough rectangle here. Okay, and then once it's in sort of a rough rectangle, we're going to fold it like we're folding like a pamphlet. So the first half kind of over into the center, and then the second half over top of it like a pamphlet. And then I just kind of give it a nice little squeeze. Okay, and then the next step after you've gotten it in this shape here is to put it in some plastic wrap. Let me move my mess here a little bit. So as you're folding it in the parchment paper, continue to give it a good squeeze. You really want like all of these dry cracks here to be smoothed out. And so once it's in the parchment, I use it to kind of just make it a bit prettier and more combined. Okay, now this needs to go in the refrigerator for at least 2 hours, but you could actually leave this in the refrigerator up to an entire day. So we're going to put it in the refrigerator and move on to our next recipe, and we will revisit it, here in a couple hours. Actually, what we're gonna do is the exact same thing again, because as I've said now, we are doing 2 of this exact same recipe, but separately. And so I'm actually just going to quickly clean up here a little bit, and then I'm gonna do what we just did together again a second time. Okay, now we need to think about finishing the bread that we have going, or at least moving on to the next part of it. So I've got my milk and tablespoon of sugar here that I had got out earlier, and I am going to just add it to a saucepan here. I just need it to get a little bit warm enough, first of all, to dissolve the sugar at least, but then it needs to be kind of lukewarm to activate the yeast. And there is a temperature here, and I can't remember what it is, if it's like 110 or what it is, where you don't want to go any hotter than that, or the yeast could be killed, won't become active, it'll die. And I always just use the pinky test. I stick my pinky in it, and if it's too hot for my pinky, it's too hot for the yeast. Okay, yep, that is warm. So we're gonna pour it back into our little bowl here. Now, I have read before that instant yeast to active dry yeast is not a perfect one-to-one conversion. I always just do it as a one-to-one conversion. I don't know if that's right or if that's wrong, but I've never had a problem with it. So the recipe says to use 4 teaspoons of instant yeast, so I'm going to use 4 teaspoons of active dry yeast. She does warn in the recipe that because we're using so much yeast, this bread recipe moves pretty quick. It rises pretty quickly, and so that's why it was so imperative that we give that dough the chance to hydrate like we talked about earlier, especially if this is going to move pretty quickly. So I'm just going to make sure one more time this isn't too hot. It's not, it's perfect. And I'm going to sprinkle 4 teaspoons of active dry yeast and let that be sitting. You'll know it's active when it becomes frothy and foamy. And if after 8 minutes nothing happens, your yeast is probably no good. But I actually just used this yeast the other day and it was fine, so it should be fine now too. I store my active dry yeast in the freezer. That's the best place for longevity because this is a 1-pound bag and it does take me quite a while to get through it. While we're waiting for our yeast to activate, let's take a look at this and see if it looks or feels any differently, because before remember I showed you how wet it was. So now it is looking, oh my gosh, I mean, night and day difference. Look at that. Still sticky, of course, but way, way less sticky than it was when we put it in there. And that's because that bran and that germ is being softened up by being allowed to sit in that liquid. Oh yeah, that's gonna be such a lovely dough. Okay, our yeast is frothy and foamy. See, I don't know if I'll be able to show you. It's ready. So I'm just gonna pour this right on top here, and throughout the kneading process that we're about to do, it'll get well incorporated. Now, I had said before that I wasn't sure my KitchenAid was gonna be able to handle this much flour, and I'm still not sure. So let's try it and see. I'm gonna leave it for now. So I can always tell when it's too much dough if it starts to come up over the lip of the hook. And it's doing that, but it's only doing it a little tiny bit. So I think I'm gonna leave it for now. This needs to knead for a long time. Like her recipe says that for the big recipe, it could take up to 25 minutes to hit window pane. This is really important because this is building the gluten structure of your bread. And I've made enough freshly milled bread to know I don't like it when it's like super, super dense. It's not gonna be like store-bought bread, and I know that, but I want it to be as soft and fluffy as I can get it, and hitting window pane is gonna give you the best possible chance of having that really pretty gluten structure. So it's important. I wanna let this go as long as possible. We did just add a ton of yeast to this. So as time goes on, it's going to get bigger in the bowl, and eventually it may be too much. I'm just gonna keep an eye on it, and for now, I'm gonna let it knead and let it do its thing. See, it's exactly like I said. Because of the yeast, it's rising. And you wanna know what? It's too bad too, because this is really, you can see how it's pulling away from the sides of the bowl, and it's still very sticky. It's not done yet, but it is getting there, which makes me sad that it's doing that. I'm gonna see if I can push it and make it. Now we have to stop it. Oh man, this thing is warm too. Yeah, see how it's getting like all up in here? I don't want that. That's not good. We don't want that. Okay, well, unfortunately, I don't think it's ready either. Sorry, heating up Tom's lunch. So window pane would be if we stretch it. Yeah, see, no, it's not quite there yet. So the solution to this problem, well, first I've got to clean this, is to remove some of this dough. I'm gonna stop this because it's starting to do it again. So what I did was I removed that. This looks amazing. It probably still isn't window pane, but I'm gonna move on because I don't want this sitting out for too long. So what I'm gonna do is I have a bowl, an oiled bowl over here. I'm gonna remove what's in here into the oiled bowl, and then I'm gonna put this back in the mixer so that this can knead for a little bit longer. Absolutely not how I would normally do that at all, but we're doing what we have to do here to make this work. All right, so Tom is home on a half day from work today for something that he needs to accomplish. And I am sort of unexpectedly going with him, which changes my plan a little bit, but it's okay. I actually think we're in a really good place for that. So here's the thing. What I had to do with the dough, because it happened exactly the way I thought it was going to. It was too much dough for my KitchenAid mixer. Someday I'll have a Bosch and everything will be great, but in the meantime, you make do with what you have. So I removed some of the dough, finished the kneading for what was in there, took that out and put it into an oiled bowl, added the dough I had removed back in, let it finish its kneading, and then put it all together in this bowl to rise. Now, the recipe says that it takes 1 to 2 hours for this to double in size. I think it has been like 30, maybe 45 minutes, but it's just so hot right now, and the temperature in your house really affects the speed of which your bread rises. So this is actually ready to go, which is perfect. That fits our timing perfectly. So I've got my two bread pans here, and I want to oil those. Now you could use parchment paper. I never do. I always use coconut oil and just come in with my fingers and really generously oil these. And at least with the glass ones, my bread always comes out really easily and doesn't stick. I have tried using other oils in the past. Coconut oil just really, really works. I think it's because it like clings to the side of the glass so well. I don't know exactly, but I'm gonna stick with what I know because it works really well. So I'm gonna quickly come and oil these so that they're ready. Those are ready, and then I'm also going to oil my work surface that I'm using here because it makes it much easier to deal with the dough, because this dough is still going to be a little bit sticky, and it just makes it easier to deal with. Okay, look at that. That's exciting. All right. Oh my gosh, that feels amazing. These are gonna be really great loaves of bread. Now obviously we're doing 2 loaves, so we can go ahead and divide this dough in 2 right off the bat. One of my bread pans is bigger than the other, so I'm just gonna eyeball making one of them a little bit bigger. Then what you need to do is, using your hands should be a little oiled from all that oiling, which is great. Kind of just pull your dough into a rectangular shape. You don't want it to be too long. You can use your bread pan as reference for kind of how like wide to make it. And then you're gonna roll it up. That ended up being obviously way longer than what my bread pan is, so I use my hands to just kind of push it back together. And then seam side down, you're just going to transfer it into your bread pan. Just like that. Now these are ready for their second rise, which is going to take place while we are gone. And then as soon as we get back, because I'm sure that this is not going to take long, as soon as we're back, these will be ready for us to immediately bake. The puff pastry is in the fridge, and that's perfect because, as I said earlier, it can be in there for up to 24 hours. So we will deal with that when we get back, and then we haven't even started the biscuits yet, so there's nothing to worry about with that. I'm actually going to put these in the fridge, I think, because they are rising so fast and we have not even left yet. So these are, honestly, I could put these in the oven and bake them right now, and I'm not ready. So I'm going to put them in the fridge to try and slow them down a little bit. As I said, temperature really affects how quickly something rises. So I'm going to give that a shot, and hopefully that's okay. Okay, we are back. I'm going to preheat the oven to 350 degrees so that we can get these loaves of bread baked. However, putting them in the fridge did not quite have the effect I was hoping. They still got a little out of hand. You know what? Oh well, we're just gonna bake them. It is what it is. Sometimes life happens. Just gonna see if I can kind of tuck this in a little bit here. She was right. Having all that yeast in the recipe sped things along. Now you could do an egg wash on these. You could do some melted butter on top. I have in the past, and it's great. The egg wash helps you get a nice dark brown on top. I don't usually do it just because I don't usually feel like it, but you're welcome to if you want. Okay, I have the oven preheating and I will pop those loaves in as soon as it's preheated. We are going to move on to the biscuits. These are actually going to move really quick. They're very straightforward. I did change my mind on the recipe. I was originally going to use my usual biscuit recipe and convert it to freshly milled flour. I don't really feel like doing that, so instead I'm going to use, again, Grains in Small Places. She has a biscuit recipe already using freshly milled flour. I'm going to use her recipe. I've never used her recipe before, so I'm not going to double it like I originally said. I'm going to just make the one recipe. It's been a long day. It's actually approaching dinner time, so at least I'll have a batch of biscuits to put in the freezer, and I will be familiar with the recipe for next time and can go from there. So I'll have the recipe linked down in the description. She does say to use soft white wheat, which is what I was planning on doing, so that's great. And you want 420 grams of it. Okay, I have my flour all milled. I'm glad that I remembered. This is a buttermilk recipe and I do not have any buttermilk. So the solution to that is to add an acid to regular milk. So this recipe calls for 1 1/4 cups of buttermilk. And then you need to add an acid. You could do vinegar or you could do lemon juice. I have both, but I have easier access to lemon juice, so I'm gonna go ahead and use that. We're gonna add a tablespoon to this, and this needs to sit so it can curdle. So that's why I said I was glad that I remembered, because we can move on with the recipe and let that be sitting. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and add our flour just to the bowl we're gonna use. And then we can add all of our dry ingredients. Starting with 1/4 cup of cornstarch. I have known about this recipe for a while. The reason I was hesitant to use it is because of the cornstarch. I don't love using cornstarch. I try not to. At least the one that I have is a non-GMO product. And I think 1/4 cup of cornstarch is a lot. I'm not exactly sure what purpose it's serving on this recipe, to be honest, but I'm gonna follow it. I need a whole tablespoon of it, and I think that's probably exactly what I have in here. Then 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Also 1 teaspoon of salt. The recipe says 1/8 cup of sugar, which is so random, and I do not have an 1/8 cup measuring cup, but 1/8 is half of 1/4, and I know that 1/4 is 4 tablespoons, so that tells me 1/8 cup is 2 tablespoons of sugar. I feel like it would have been easier to say 2 tablespoons of sugar than 1/8 cup, but what do I know? All right, and those are our dry ingredients, so I'm just gonna give this a quick mix. Something tells me this bowl is probably too small, but my big bowl is dirty, so we're in it, guys. So the single version of this recipe calls for 1 cup or 2 sticks of butter, whereas the single version of the other recipe called for 1/2 cup, so half as much butter. But because I was doubling that one, I have 1 cup of butter or 2 sticks already cold and cubed. That is another reason why I don't usually go with this recipe. I think that's a lot of butter for a single 2 sticks for 1 single biscuit recipe. To me is a lot. I'm sure that they're scrumptious having that much butter, but I would rather make my butter stretch and get more final product. So I think I am in the future going to just convert my regular biscuit recipe to freshly milled flour versus using this recipe. But we'll see. I guess I'll have to see how they turn out and if I just like absolutely love them. So I am going to use a pastry cutter. The puff pastry recipe actually specifically said not to use a pastry cutter, and it said to keep the chunks of butter really big. But in this case, we are trying to break the butter up and incorporate it a little bit more. So I'm going to use my pastry cutter. You could also use a food processor. You better believe if I had a food processor, I'd be using it. Nope, I'm not doing that. That is going to be such a mess. The bowl is way too small. Oh my gosh. This butter is rock hard. Whew, okay. So you're supposed to do that until the butter is pea sized. A couple of these pieces are a little bit bigger than pea size, but there's a lot of butter in here, so I imagine it's probably going to be just fine. I'll break up a couple of these bigger pieces with my hands. All right, and then kind of make a well in the middle here and add in our buttermilk. Ooh, that curdled really nice. As you can imagine, after everything we've talked about today with freshly milled flour, this is going to be quite wet. And so after I'm done mixing it, you just want to mix it until there's no dry flour left. We're going to cover this and put it in the fridge so that it can hydrate. That is today's word of the day, hydrate. When working with freshly milled flour, it's a very important step if you want a really nice finished product, that is. You know, the hydration too is a very intuitive thing because if you tried to work with this dough right now, you would not have fun and you would end up having to add so much flour because it would be so sticky that you wouldn't even really be able to get anywhere with it. And so it's almost like a common sense intuitive step to let the dough hydrate, and it's just so much more pleasant to work with after it's been sitting for a little while. It technically only needs to sit for 15 minutes, but we're gonna actually work on the puff pastry for a little bit, so we'll get back to this when we get back to it. Oh, that bread baking is smelling so good, oh my gosh. So my dinner plan changed with me going out earlier unexpectedly. And so instead we are actually going to use, I'm glad I doubled the puff pastry. We're going to use one of them tonight. We might not use the whole thing. We'll see. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But this first one we're actually going to go ahead and turn into dinner so that I can get it going and get it baking. And we are going to make sausage cream cheese rolls. I'm really excited. It's one of my favorite things to use puff pastry for. And you know, I'm glad that it's turning out that way in this video, because you'll get to see just how flaky and amazing homemade puff pastry is. So much better than the store-bought stuff. So fewer ingredients. It's really awesome. So actually, this puff pastry dough has been in the fridge for hours. Like, I don't know guys, probably 5 hours. And it's hard as a rock, and I'm not gonna get anywhere rolling this out with a rolling pin. So I'm actually gonna leave this for a few minutes to warm up before I start trying to dig into it. Okay, we can start trying to go ahead and roll this out. It's going to be difficult the very first time, but it'll be easier every time after, and we have to do this 6 times. So what we're doing here is rolling this out into a rectangle again, but a really thin one. I think like, I can't remember, 1/2 inch to 1 inch, I think it said, something like that. And like I said, it's going to be difficult the first time. You can still see it's got these huge chunks of butter in it. As it warms up, it is going to start sticking to your rolling pin, so I do have my flour handy here so that I can come through and occasionally flour my rolling pin, because this is going to end up getting sticky, and my work surface, as you can see, is floured as well. Okay, I think that's probably good for our first one. So just like before, we're going to fold it like a pamphlet. I'm going to keep my bench scraper handy. If you don't have one of these, I'll have mine linked down in the description. I absolutely love having a bench scraper, just so I can really get up underneath it and make sure I'm getting all that butter off. And then you want to just make sure you're keeping your surface floured, because this is only going to get stickier the more it warms up. And then we're going to rotate it and do the exact same thing. That was our first time. We have to do it 5 more times. And you may be noticing that the more you do it, the less defined the butter is. It's warming up, it's getting worked into the dough. Oh, that's our alarm for the bread. Let's take a look at the bread. So I've had this bread in here for 30 minutes. I'm going to take out the biggest one, because if the biggest one is done, the smallest one is definitely done. Now, if you look at this, it may look done because it's very brown. But the proper way to tell if a loaf of bread is finished is to take its temperature. So I have this thermometer. Again, I'll link this down in the description. Very handy tool. I use it for a lot of different applications. You want your bread to be 190 degrees in the center. Yeah, see, this bread is only 124-ish degrees in the center. This bread is not done. Oh, and it's even sticky on the edge of the thermometer. This is not done. But look at how brown it is. So what we're gonna do is tent some foil over this to keep it from getting any more brown. It's already very brown. And I just kind of like loosely lay it on top, just like that. And we're gonna have to do it to the other one too. The other one's also very brown. Okay, so this was my last rollout that I needed to do to just for the recipe. So now this final one is going to be the one that I actually roll it out to use it, because we are just gonna go ahead and make dinner with this. And so this can be, let's make my surface nice again. I'm actually gonna put a little more flour down because I really want this to come up well for me. Okay. Doesn't that look so much more like the puff pastry you'd get from the store? It's much smoother, doesn't have the cracks and the bumps. Very, very pretty, very what you'd expect puff pastry to look like. And now we're gonna roll it out for the final time. From here, rolling out your puff pastry, you're just gonna roll it out to whatever thickness you want for your recipe. It's hard for me to tell you like exactly what it should look like, because I kind of just do it with my heart, especially when I'm like about to cook with it or bake with it. I just kind of roll it out until it's the thickness that I think we would enjoy for whatever it is I'm making. And so with me making these cream cheese sausage rolls, I'll know it when I see it, which I know is not a great thing to say like in a recipe video, but I'll show you. This is really fighting me, so I'm actually going to let this sit and rest for a second. It's fighting me really hard. Anytime you have a dough that you're trying to roll out and it's bouncing back on you, just let it sit a second so that it can relax. Okay, I ultimately ended up deciding to just roll it out to how thick the rest of my sausage is. So I need to go just a little bit further to get all this sausage. This is pretty thin though, so I don't want to go much more. I'm pretty happy with this. Okay, that'll be mostly good, I think. All right, and then I want to spread my cream cheese on here. This is so easy. If you were to have the puff pastry already made and you pulled this out and got it rolled out, this is such a delicious and easy dinner to make. That's why I love these so much, and they're so good. Oh my gosh, I cannot overstate how good these are. Okay, and then I like for this to have a little sweetness. So I just put a little bit of maple syrup on here. Just a little. Because I do make a dipping sauce for these, so I don't want to go crazy with the maple syrup. Then I'm gonna put my sausage on here. And I just had this left over. This is just a pre-cooked smoked salmon. This is just a pre-cooked smoked sausage that I had left over from a different recipe. Normally I probably would have done like ground sausage with like some herbs and stuff. And then you're just gonna fold this over. See, bench scrapers are so handy. If you don't have one, you need to get one. And I like for it to be kind of tight. And then you're just gonna keep rolling it up. Keeping it as tight as you can. Until it's seam side down. just like that. So I keep the ends open. I don't really care that much. You know what I should have done, and I'm just remembering, normally I seal this with a little bit of water, but it's sticking pretty well, so hopefully that's fine. I should have done that, I forgot. Okay, and last thing we're gonna do is cut these into rolls. That's the alarm for our bread, and I do not want to abandon that, so let's pause and take a look at that. Oh my gosh, so brown. I'm learning, so this is obviously a new oven stove for me. You guys know, just moved to this townhouse, so I'm learning it. I should have covered this with foil a lot sooner. This is very brown. Okay, we're at 190. Yep, 190. So the smaller one is good. Let's check the bigger one. You can see that they did deflate a little bit in the middle, and I'm not surprised. I would have baked them way before they rose that much. I just obviously didn't really have the chance. So this is reading in the 180s. I'm gonna call it because I don't want that to be in there any longer. So this one is not quite 190, but I think it'll be fine. I do not like to leave my bread to cool in the pan that it baked in. So I do have a baker's rack here, and I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get that bread out of those pans and onto this to cool. However, with it being as overproofed and sticky as it was, even with me oiling up those pans, it could be that I have a hard time getting it out. So let's see what happens. Fingers crossed it comes right out, but... Oh my gosh, it stuck a little on the one side there. I'm shocked that came out that easily. Yeah, a little bit of a casualty here on the side, but that's okay. I'm gonna leave the bigger one in its pan for a few minutes because it's actually a little underbaked. And so I don't normally do that. Normally I get them right out, but I am gonna let the bigger one sit for a few minutes. The temperature for the puff pastry is 400, and this is only set to 350 right now for the bread, so I am gonna go ahead and bump that up. Okay, so like I was saying, I've got my parchment lined baking sheet. By the way, this is my new Nordic Ware aluminum baking sheet that I got on Amazon Prime Day. That Amazon Prime Days are no longer happening, but I'll still link it down in the description because they are made in the USA. Very durable, meant to last a long time, excellent baking sheets. They're very large, and they also have a great, very tall lip. And I love baking sheets that have a lip. So I will have those linked. Okay, using a very sharp knife, I'm just going to cut these into individual sized rolls. Look how yummy. Ooh, these are gonna be so good. Now for something like this, I am going to whip up a quick egg wash, which is just an egg that I'm going to quickly whisk. You could add water, a splash of water, you could add a splash of milk, or it can just be egg. You could also add seasonings in here. Sage would be really good in this. If I had any sage, there'd be sage in here. Or Italian seasoning. It just depends on what it is you've got in your sausage roll. And then this is my pitiful little, this used to have a whole handle and it broke, but I still use the brush piece. Isn't that funny? I could probably get one so cheap off Amazon or at Walmart or something, but this works. And then I'm just gonna brush that on here. Okay, and I thought about it and decided I just want to do a little sprinkle of salt on top of each one of these. I think that a little bit of salt on these would be great. And oh my gosh, would you look at that? Don't those just look delicious? Cannot wait to see what they look like out of the oven. Okay, our bread is baked and our first batch of puff pastry that we're using for dinner is in the oven. So now we can go ahead and think about our biscuits. So easy, you guys. I love making buttermilk biscuits. Let's go ahead and get this onto, you know what? I already know it's gonna need way more flour. Okay. All right, and we're going to very generously flour the top of this. Now, you may notice I'm using all-purpose flour for my flouring of my work surface. I know people do freshly mill the flour that they plan on using in this capacity. I never do that. I don't know how much I'm gonna want. I don't wanna have to keep turning my mill on. I'm not doing that. So I always just use all-purpose. Now, every single time I make biscuits, it's true that I do have to add more flour. It looks like I'm gonna have to do that quite a bit for these. And my bench scraper's in the sink, dang it. Okay, and in this instance, just with the way I rolled it out, I'm gonna do the pamphlet again, the letter, but I'm just gonna do it towards me instead of side to side. And with all buttermilk biscuits, you're going for a layered flaky biscuit. So I'm just gonna go ahead and pick that up and put more flour down because it's definitely gonna need it. So we'll turn it and do that again. And the more you do it, the more of those flaky layers you're going to end up with, and the better the biscuit's gonna be. And we did it. So that time we folded it without it sticking at all. So I think that this is probably good to go, which means we're going to do the final rollout, which will be the one that we use to actually cut our biscuits. And I want my biscuits to be fat. And so I'm actually going to roll this out to still be pretty thick. All right, now my plan for these is to put them in this little pan with that foil that we were using for the bread, because what I have not mentioned yet is how I'm storing all of this. That's actually going to be something that we have to get to tomorrow because I'm not going to have the time today. So I'm going to do a layer of them in here. This is my biscuit cutter set. I'll have it linked. I always use the second largest. And I'm going to cut out, you want to go straight down and straight up. Don't twist. Those are hefty. And I'm just going to set them down in this little sheet here. And then I'm going to put this over top for my second layer. Okay, and here they are. I've got 3 layers of biscuits. These are going to go ahead and go in the freezer. We will talk more about the plan for those tomorrow. My surface is in perfect condition for me to go ahead and roll out my last puff pastry. And the puff pastries that are in the oven have just a few minutes left, and I'll show those to you when they are done. Look at these. Are you actually kidding me? Look at the layers. Oh, come on. Look at those layers. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. Yum. Good morning. We are going to finish up this preserving day. We're pretty much done all of the hard work we did previously, but now it is time to actually talk about how we're going to store these items. So currently everything that we made, the biscuits, the 2 loaves of bread, and the puff pastry are in the freezer. I'm going to vacuum seal all of them. Is this necessary? No, it is not. If you don't have a vacuum sealer, you can certainly just stick these things in plastic bags and put them in your freezer that way. It really depends on how soon you're going to use it. I'm not even due to have this baby for another 2 months, and then beyond that, I don't know when we are going to consume these items, and I don't want to feel any pressure to get to them sooner rather than later. Vacuum sealing is the best way to protect them from freezer burn, loss of nutritional value, loss of taste, and decreased appearance and whatnot. So I am going to use my vacuum sealer. I have a food saver. I love this thing. I'll link it down in the description. One of these days I'm going to do a kitchen appliance video where I talk about what appliances I really love. My food saver is one of them. It's a great way to get your food to really stretch. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all those things out of the freezer. The 2 loaves of bread I literally just stuck in there. I didn't wrap them, I didn't put them in anything, I just stuck them right in there. We'll do the puff pastry first because it'll be the easiest. So when trying to decide where to cut your bag, I always look at where my sealing bar is in conjunction to where the end of the machine is, because I have to be able to close it. And so I want to make sure that my food can be in the bag can be sealing, and the food saver can be closed. So this looks pretty good. I'm gonna cut that. stick this down in here just like this. Put it in. And here is my vacuum sealed puff pastry. This will last in the freezer for a very, very long time. I mean, years, honestly, before it starts to really be affected by the freezer. So I've got my Sharpie here, label everything. Obviously, I can look at this and see that it's puff pastry. More, I'm looking for the date on this one. I'm still gonna write puff pastry, but I am going to write July 2025. Okay, and this is all set. Everything that we have made in this video is going to actually go down in the deep freezer because, again, I'm not going to need it right away, and I'd rather store it there. I know that it'll be out of the way and will store longer in the deep freezer. Here's a good example of me misjudging the size. So I tried to cut this bag big enough to fit this loaf of bread, but I didn't take into account how thick it was. And so the bag needs to go into this green part here that helps vacuum suck the air out. And then this is the sealing bar here. So in order for it to fit down in there and then this to close, I would have needed to have made this bag much bigger. But that's okay because I'll use this bag for the biscuits and that'll work fine. But it's so tricky because I use the cut your own roll, and I do like that because obviously I don't want all my bags to be the same size. That wouldn't work. But sometimes it's really hard to judge how big to make your bags. A couple more points I'd like to make here while we're talking about how we're preserving these. Why did I put these things in the freezer before vacuum sealing them? Two reasons. The first being for these loaves of bread, for example, they came out of the oven and even after they cooled, they were very fluffy, and the vacuum function on this is so strong that it would have crushed the loaves of bread and would have really smushed them. And it would have been fine. They would have still been edible. And who knows, when they thawed, maybe they would have sprung back up into their original shape. I don't know. But I don't like it. It bothers me. There's lots of things that happens with. And so I like to freeze things before I vacuum seal them because this rock hard loaf of bread is going to be able to keep its shape against how strong the vacuum seal is on this thing. And I mean, don't get me wrong, that's what's so great about it because oxygen is your enemy when it comes to food preservation. And it really, I mean, look at how tight that plastic is to the rim on this bread. It's really vacuum sealed very well, but the pressure can crush what you're sealing. The other reason, we're gonna go ahead and use this bag to freeze some of these biscuits. Well, at first I was actually going to split this into two separate batches. We have 10 biscuits. I was going to do 5 and 5, but this bag that I have for the bread's so big and I don't want to waste it. I think I'm probably just going to go ahead and freeze them all, and that's fine. Okay, so here are all of our biscuits in this bag. This bag is too big for them, but at least the whole bag will get used. Or you know what, I might spread them out and make it a layer of, that'll store better. I'll probably do that. I'm actually going to lay this out and kind of spread them out so it makes more of a layer, and that'll take up less room in the deep freezer. But anyway, the purpose of me freezing these ahead of time is that I can vacuum seal them and they will not freeze in one big clump of buttery unbaked biscuit. They will keep their individual shape. And so I will be able to pull these apart and bake them. You know, they'll keep their shape, they'll maintain their integrity as individual biscuits because I froze them before vacuum sealing them. Because again, the force of the vacuum really fuses and forces everything together, and I've had that happen plenty of times where it just becomes one big clump of something. So I freeze them ahead of time so that doesn't happen. Alright friends, and there you have it. This was the very start, the very beginning of my postpartum food prep. We've got 2 loaves of bread, one puff pastry and one batch of buttermilk biscuits. This was very bread focused, and we will certainly be getting into some proteins and some soups and some things like that in the future, but this was just a great place for me to start, a great place for me to get my feet wet, getting back into this type of filming. I thank you so much for hanging out with me while we did this, and I can't wait to see you in my next one. Have faith, my friends, and keep moving forward. Bye.